What is going on, everybody? Happy Friday to everybody paying attention here in IDP Fantasy Football land. You are here on Shoot the Gap, our fantasy football podcast for IDP Fantasy Football here on the Fantasy and Frames podcast. I'm your host, Jorge Edwards. With me, we got Justin Taylor, a.k.a. JT Orange, over on the X. And today, we're here to talk about the NFC East, as in players you should be targeting from this division for your IDP fantasy football teams and players that you may want to, I don't want to say avoid, but maybe avoid, but also temper expectations on. So before we get into that, let's get into this. JT, my friend, how are you doing on this fine Friday evening?
I'm doing good. Yeah, usually Fridays are a terrible day for me. I can't usually do the podcast on Friday, but a little construction at the brewery is allowing me to get a little night off here tonight. So we're on it here on a Friday night.
Yeah, no, it definitely not the norm here at Fantasy and Frames. Normally, we like to get a lot of our shows in on Wednesdays and Thursdays, but life happens, scheduling happens, but we wanted to make sure we got in this week's divisional preview because we are getting close to the start of the fantasy football season, and this is probably information that you probably will find very useful for your fantasy football leagues, aka your IDP fantasy football leagues. But before we get into that, I want to bring back an old segment that we'll be bringing into the regular season right now. Let's go over some news and notes, IDP news and notes from around the NFL. So, did you like that, by the way? Was that pretty?
I love it. I'm in on that.
But let's talk about, first of all, last weekend. Let's talk about the my experiences with the King Classic, and I'll be very brief with this. So for those who are unaware, the Kings Classic is a super elite, the best of the best tournament. And there are multiple divisions in said tournament. The crown who is the best at your particular thing. Okay. So you have the Jim Brown, you have the Blanda division. And then for me, I'm in the Butkus IDP Kings Classic division. Again, Bob Long created these divisions in this tournament years ago to be the best of the best at what they do. And so being in a league with Gary Davenport, a.k.a. the godfather of IDP, to be in a league with Leo McNeely, a.k.a. Master IDP, Steve Hungarter, who we had on the show a couple weeks ago, at IDP Hunter, John Norton, you just name the list of players, Iggy, IDP Iggy, like just all sorts of people in the IDP community who really are the best of the best. And I know I'm missing a bunch of people, and I apologize. But the gist of it is, though, one of the things I think in IDP fantasy football that more people, and yes, I'm being very biased when I say what I'm about to say, is I don't think we get enough respect. As Rodney Dangerfield used to say, or paraphrasing, like, where's the respect around here, or something like that. I forget how he said it, but you get what I'm saying there, JT.
Absolutely.
We got some last week because Bob Harris walked in while we were getting ready to start drafting, aka the Hall of Famer Bob Harris, and he said, "Well, we got the brightest stars in the room here. You got the guys who cover both offense and defense." And I was like, "Yes, this is
the guys that do both." I tell you what, man. People are always like, "Oh man, I didn't realize how much more extra work that is for you guys when I only come." Because people say that to me. They're like, "Oh, you do like Heavy and C2C in college?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, man." And then people look at it, they're like, "Oh, you watch a ton of football." Like, I don't watch that much. I'm like, I watch an insane amount of football. My girlfriend will attest because she's like, "You pretty much do nothing but watch football from Thursday through Monday night every week." I'm watching football. Like, I'm watching 3 to 8, depending on what I have at work, 3 to 8 to 10 college games on Saturday. Now they have games throughout the week. So I've got Thursday night football on. I got those games. College games now are on Friday night, so I'm watching college games if I'm not watching high school stuff. Sunday, obviously, NFL all day. Monday, then you got the Monday night game. And now with the smaller college teams, we've got games on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Once the season kicks off, we start getting action and some other stuff. So, I mean, I've got football on. I mean, the amount of time I spend watching football is insane. And my friends are like, man, I really just I maybe watch like a game a week and then I just kind of look at everything else and I'm like, oh, I guess that is what a normal person does. I'm just watching everything. But then again, checking waiver wires. I'm checking college stuff. I'm checking IDP. Where's the injuries? How many snaps are everybody playing on defense as opposed to offense? You're just like, oh, he scored this many points. Okay, I'm picking that guy up. Defense, you got to look at all the other stuff. So it's a ton more work when you're on both sides of the ball because there's very rare in this segment. Is there anyone that just does IDP? That never talks about offense, never does anything on offense side, just does defense. People really just don't do it. So it's just an extra thing you're adding to all the things you're writing about, you're talking about, you're studying. So it is a whole lot more. That is for sure.
And so the fact that you cover all those different things and then on both sides of the ball, hearing Bob Harris giving some props to the duality of what we do here when covering fantasy football, it was very humbling to finally hear.
It's nice to get a little pat on the back sometimes, right?
It is, man. I'm not gonna lie. But I digress. So I'm sorry. I'm having a coworker text me right now. Random question. I have a friend that's big in fantasy. Could you send me a link or name of your podcast? I'm saying here we are.
We're live right now.
We're live streaming right now. But anywho, yeah, man, it just was a lot of fun. Highly recommend if you're ever at the Fantasy Football Expo weekend to go over to the Kings Classic, check it out. If you're a fan of of auction drafts, if you're a fan of like snake drafts, just seeing like these people that you looked up to, and I don't want to clump myself into those people because I still feel like I'm aspiring to be that. But it was a lot of fun. Get to learn a lot about different strategies from different analysts. Our draft was 5.5 hours nonstop, 34 rounds, offense and defensive players. So it was a war of attrition, but it was definitely worth it. A lot of fun. JT, next year you got to come out.
I'm definitely planning on it, man. It's just like I said. The only reason my son was their very first tackle football game by the defensive coordinator. One of the other coaches already couldn't make it. We have 4 coaches. One of the other coaches couldn't make it for work reasons, and I was like, I just really don't think I can miss the very first game, especially as 5th graders, because
of course,
these guys is the first year ever playing like anything other than flag, which if anyone's ever coached little kids flag football, it's literally hike and everyone just runs around and screams the quarterback's name. So it's not like they don't know the positions. They don't know actually plays. They're not sure how to do things. So, we're really just teaching these kids first time out, like how to play defense, where to line up, what are your keys, what to read, So I'm like, man, if I'm not there week 1, I feel like it's going to be a huge issue. So next year, hopefully, I'm still planning on coaching, but next year I think it'll be easier for me to take that weekend off and get over there. Plus, hopefully, if I have a home game that week, I can just turn around and drive right over. Problem was we were like an hour and a half away in the opposite direction of Ohio from where I'm at in Illinois. So I was like, I looked up the thing to see if I could figure out how to get there. And I was like, I'm not even going to get there until if I'm lucky, 9 or 10 o'clock Saturday night, and then turn around and have to be back on Monday for practice. I was like, I don't think I can make that work. So, but I definitely have it on the calendar for next year. Definitely planning on making it next year.
And for those who are going to be making it next year who didn't make it this year, get there a day early. Get there on Thursday.
If you get Thursday's the way to go. I like I said, it's Sunday's the actual expo. I always tell people Sunday's the expo, but getting to talk to everybody, all the events, all the pre stuff, the drafts, everything's on Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday. So definitely showing up. The year before when I went, me and John McGlynn showed up on Thursday night. Definitely worth it. You get a chance to get out there. There's so many people you want to talk to and meet. It's like you don't feel like you have enough time. So the more days and more time you're there where you can feel like you can walk around and meet everybody, it's the better.
Absolutely. For those watching on JT or my individual X streams, don't forget to head over to our YouTube channel and hit that notification bell, as well as the subscribe button, so you're notified when Fantasy and Frames puts out content. We're dealing with Redraft, Dynasty, IDP, College Fantasy, DFS, you name it, best ball. Speaking of DFS, immediately following Shoot the Gap tonight, we have the Daily Fix Show, where they finally have the trifecta all together for this season. We have Keith Fleming, we got Joe Matz, and then the newest member to the Daily Fix Show, Kevin Tompkins, will be joining these three guys, where they'll be talking about value plays for DraftKings, NFL, DFS for Week 1. Definitely do not want to miss it.
I am pumped for that show. I saw that was coming on. I was like, oh, I'm going to stick on afterwards. I was like, I can't wait, because I'm all fired up, because I'm like doing research this weekend, because next week I'm going to have, like, over the next week or two on the Stu with JT Brew now here on Fantasy and Friends, I'm going to have our first college betting show, breaking down stuff on Monday on 1 Foot Down, like who we think is going to win the divisions, things like that. And that's going to play into some of my betting show that's going to be on Tuesday night on Fantasy and Frames. We're going to talk about who we're picking to win the national title, who we're picking to make the playoffs, Heisman, all kinds of stuff. So I'm getting fired up, as it's all real. All the lines are out, and so we're going to be putting all that info out now. So I was take a step back in the summer during baseball season. Don't really get on the betting game, but man, we're going to hit it hard on the Stu with JT Brew here on Fantasy and Frames for the betting people out there. Starting next week.
Absolutely. All right. Well, JT, let's give the people what they want, what they're here for. They want to hear about, the IDP fantasy football players they should be targeting in their fantasy football drafts this month and early, I guess, the first week in September. Let's start with the Philadelphia Eagles, because I feel like there's a lot of talent on the Eagles from year in, year out on terms of the defensive side of the ball. But for IDP purposes, it just never is easy to pick like the one or the two that you can 100% confidently pick to be your guy, just because the heavy amount of rotation they have between players, keeping like they're a plethora of riches. They basically have been drafting from the University of Georgia the past few years in the first rounds. They're getting tons of talent, but they don't keep the talent on the field at all times. They kind of like rotate these guys in and out, keep them fresh, which is smart for a real football standpoint. But for IDP, it's a little frustrating. You look at what they've done majorly in free agency this year. They brought in Bryce Huff from the New York Jets, who was coincidentally in a rotation there along the edge of defensive line. They brought in Devin White from Tampa Bay as an unrestricted free agent. They drafted Quinion Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Jeremiah Trotter. And what's crazy is that we still are not seeing a lot of introduction of these players into the starting lineup, especially during training camp and OTAs. Like, remember Jacoby Dean? He was supposed to be a thing out of the University of Georgia. He can't crack the start.
He can't get in there. I mean, you just look at the names. I mean, you just go down the roster and you're like, I mean, this team is loaded. If you just go with name recognition and quality players, I mean, this team is absolutely stacked. And then you saw last year, they got pummeled on defense. They were terrible defensively, and it made no sense. They've got a ton of names back. But again, like you said, we're not 100% sure who's going to be the guy, who are going to be the starters. And even if you are the guy, are you going to do enough to be, someone that you really want to go heavy on in IDP purposes? This is a team that right now I'm super perplexed on like where to take these guys, who I want to kind of target in drafts. I just was doing updating all my IDP rankings last night. I spent about 10 hours on it. And I was the Eagles players. I was like, man, where do I put these guys? Because if you just go off the name and the talent, you're like, man, this guy should be ranked here. But you're like, is he going to play in that position? How much is he going to play? Is he going to rotate? This team is really super confusing, and it might be a couple weeks before we really realize or know, and depending on injury, who's going to end up being the guy or the guys that are IDP playable this season.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And you would think with guys like Jeremiah Trotter, the rookie, maybe he would not be somebody who would crack the starting line just yet. But like Jacoby Dean, Nolan Smith, coming out as an edge rusher, not there. The only one from Georgia who has been worth a damn, who really does, and I know this may be sacrilegious for some people to hear, who has that Aaron Donald-esque quality is Jalen Carter. I still go back to last year versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where the Buccaneers tried to snap or do the spike of the football, and Jalen Carter almost dove underneath the offensive lineman and caught the spike, which was one of the most amazing plays had it actually turned out to be the case. But he's still far from being somebody who in a defensive line only setup here for your fantasy football leagues is somebody that I would not yet start as a defensive tackle. As a defensive tackle, if that snap percentage starts going up higher in defensive tackle leagues, now we're talking, right? But in three position designations, I still think he's a little bit farther away.
He's a guy I definitely am targeting, especially like you said, if it's a defensive tackle designation league, I want him. I think he's got huge upside. We knew it was going to be a little bit of a learning curve last year, I think, with him coming in. Jordan Davis is, absolute physical freak beast next to him. If both those guys can stay healthy, I mean, I love Jordan Davis, but he's a better real life player than he is fantasy player, just because he eats up double teams, stacks the line. I think if he plays up to his ability, I think Jalen Carter is going to be even better, because now what are teams going to do against both those guys on the inside? It's going to be really tough. Both those guys battle a little bit injuries. I still think they were trying to figure out and get into like NFL shape last year, because both of them didn't play a huge snap percentage. I really like the upside talent of those guys, but again, like you said, you can't be drafting them expecting them to be your guy and set them in your lineup right now. It's just that's not the case.
So we got a question here from DX Gypsy. I hope he means like D-Generation X from like Pro Wrestling WWE.
That would be sweet.
That would be sweet. Now, normally, DX Gypsy, I know if you're new to the show, which I believe you are, because I would recognize most people. First of all, welcome. Second, we normally keep shoot the gap questions to defense, but you know what? It's Friday, so what the hell?
We can mix it up. Like we said, we just talked about, we do both. We do both. Me and you were first. We can do both.
He said, "Indeed," for DX. I love it. Well, you're with some. Look at the belt there, DX Gypsy. I mean, come on. Got some WWF love here. Anywho, it's really good that you brought up this question. The question here is for those who are listening: thoughts on the Giants? Malik Neighbors obviously around the fourth, but how about Daniel Jones and Devin Singletary as sleepers, and improved offensive line? Jones desperately trying to save his job, a pass-catching running back. What are your thoughts here? My thoughts are that you should have tuned in last night to Fourth and Frames, where we were actually talking about the divisional breakdown of the NFC East, where we were actually discussing who is a must, who is a bust, and who is a maybe for each team in the NFC East. And I'll go ahead and spoil it for you, but I do recommend you going back.
And just say, go back and watch that. Go back and listen to the show or watch it on YouTube for sure. But
well,
we'll still answer. We'll still answer. We'll still answer.
Here's new is like, I figure, we got to, the first time here they get a pass, right? So Rhett Manuel, who is the host of Fourth and Frames, myself and Nate Markham, we were talking about this last night. And in terms of a must, Devin Singletary was brought up there. Obviously, for the Giants, the two must players are Malik Neighbors and Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary is a fantastic running back option for those who are going wide receiver heavy in their drafts and are going zero RB. He's going to get the volume. You're not worried about Eric Gray. You're not worried about Tyrone Tracy usurping any snaps from Devin Singletary. We look at how Singletary carried the load for Houston down the stretch last year. I think weeks 10 through 18, he was one of the top running backs in all of fantasy football. Just fantastic. He has his history with Brian Dable. Gotta love it. Daniel Jones, I'm a little bit concerned about, and by a little bit, I mean a lot. But I think it helps Neighbors, because Neighbors is your deep threat, right? He's the guy who's going to be stretching the field. And so I was looking into some of his metrics. And so Malik Neighbors, per PFF, aka Pro Football Focus, they graded him out to be a better deep ball passer of 20 yards or more than a short and intermediate throwing quarterback. Not to say that he's poor at those things, but he really excels at the deep ball, which I was blown away by. And the fact that that is the case, you have Neighbors, you have Singletary. My maybe for the New York Giants was actually Wan'Dale Robinson. I think he's going to open up a lot of things underneath the middle. I think Daniel Jones and Malik Neighbors are going to open a lot of things underneath the middle. Daniel Jones has averaged up the target for his career is 7.5 yards. Wan'Dale Robinson's averaged up the target over the course of his career is 5.6. And so you have that overlap there where they're right in the sweet spot of where they like to throw, aka where they like to catch. And Robinson can have some very sneaky value also as a flex, wide receiver 4, maybe wide receiver 3, depending on how far your roster is constructed. But yeah, so for more information about the New York Giants,
I will jump on and just tell you real quick. You crushed that. You absolutely crushed that, by the way. I 100% agree with you. Devin Singletary, I've always liked him. I've always thought he's great. He is an absolute steal on sleeper. If you watched the HBO Hard Knocks with the Giants the offseason, when they were like, who do we want to target if we don't get Saquon? Number one on the list was Devin Singletary. That sells me. Like, I mean, he was like, it wasn't like the discussion. It was like, we're going after Devin Singletary if we don't re-sign Saquon Barkley. That sells me. Plus the fact that he was with Dable. So Dable, and the fact that I didn't know his nickname was Motor. Like, that's awesome. I was like, dude, I'm in. I already like Devin Singletary, Florida Atlantic Owls. I was going to bring that up. My sister and brother-in-law went there. I love Devin Singletary. I think he's probably the best sleeper. And I love Neighbors. Obviously has the talent. But here's my thing. If Daniel Jones goes down, Drew Lock is a perfect quarterback for Neighbors. He loves to throw the deep ball. He doesn't care if you're double teamed. He will try to fit it in there to you on the deep pass. He absolutely loves to throw deep. So if Daniel Jones does get hurt, what you said perfectly, he actually throws the ball better deep than people realize. I think Drew Lock, and that's part of the reason I think they brought him in. I think they don't change the offense one bit if Drew Lock comes in. I think it's the exact same. So I'm 100% on Neighbors. And then I think Wan'Dale Robinson, I'm with you on this. When he's played, it's been brief before the injuries, but he's been very solid. He's been very good. I think he takes a step up. I think he's the underneath route guy this year. I've been grabbing him everywhere I can late because it's like people forgot about him. So 100% with you on those.
And to dig just a little bit, I know, folks, we'll get to IDP in a second. Trust me. We will be speeding through this as now Keith Fleming is watching probably right now saying, will you guys finish your show already? Come on. Wan'Dale Robinson last year led the team on the Giants with target separation, catch rate, percent of team targets, first read options. So the quarterback is going to Wan'Dale first and foremost. Daniel Jones will be going to Wan'Dale first and foremost. Just somebody to pay attention to. So DX Gypsy, thank you very much for tuning in. If you have any more questions, hit us up. If you want to hear more,
stick around for the Giants defensive segment. We're headed to them shortly.
Yeah, we'll probably hit that next. And of course, if you want to hear more about the NFC East on offense, go tune in. We're on the Fantasy and Frames podcast to our NFC East breakdown, or head over to our YouTube channel and watch that. And if you're on our YouTube channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you're notified when Fantasy and Frames cranks out more awesome fantasy football content. So DX Gypsy, thanks for tuning in. All right, let's get back into IDP mode, and we're gonna go rapid fire here because I don't think there's much to talk about. If you had to pick an IDP here, let me back up here. There are 3 IDPs here that I actually in the linebacking core that I care about, but I am concerned about. And there are 2 defensive backs that I feel like can be league winners for you guys. Love it, DX Gypsy. Love it. I should care about Devin White. I'm scared to care about Devin White.
I know. I agree. It's like, doesn't it feel like the drop off? Like if you're the Bucks and you've got him and Levante David, and Levante David's like, what, 8 years older than Devin White? Like, the fact that they would rather keep David than White, who was your first-round pick, that scares me. It scares me a lot.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, in terms of the defensive back situation, you brought up, maybe it was in pre-show. I can't remember if it was pre-show or not. But we look at, Reed Blankenship, who, according to Fantasy Pros, was a defensive back 8 in points per game with 11.9. And then it's CJ Gardner-Johnson, who was tied for 14th in points per game with 11.4. I feel actually more comfortable with those guys as my defensive back starters than I do with the linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles, which is ass backwards for IDP because you normally think it's the other way around. But coincidentally, this is the right pair to talk about because you and I, JT, are in the minority in that we actually think defensive backs matter in fantasy football, that they should not just be cast away, especially if you pick the right ones, right? Yeah. So what are your thoughts there really quickly before we get to the Giants?
Yeah, I like Blankenship a lot. Like, I think he's super underrated. People still don't know about him. He didn't come from a big school. So people kind of just are sleeping on him. I was just telling you, pre-show, I was talking about him because I was going through my rankings and I was like, man, I'm the only person that has him ranked on DLF right now. I was like, man, I think people are sleeping on him a bit. I think Gardner Johnson coming back over the Eagles from the Lions, I think them sliding him back. He kind of was like playing that nickel slot. I think they're going to play him more at the safety. I like him there. I'm a big Sidney Brown guy, but he tore the ACL last year. I would assume he's going to be a backup pretty much this whole season, which is why they went out and got Gardner Johnson. So I like Sidney Brown for the future. He's a stash for me. I just really talented guy out of Illinois, but I don't see him contributing a lot with this defense. The guys that are going to get me, and a lot of questions people are asking about, are Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Now, are those guys going to play shutdown corner, or is either one of those guys going to play the nickel? If either one ends up getting the nickelback spot, I'm in on him. I would love either one of those guys there. I've talked about DeJean a couple times. If he ends up on playing the nickel and kick and punt returns, which is what he did at Iowa, and your league counts those points, I think he's a huge buy. If he doesn't do any of those things, I don't think he's even rosterable. Mitchell, same way. If he ends up playing on the outside, I don't see a lot for him. They've been playing him a little bit in the nickel slot in camp, which is surprising because he was kind of drafted to be a shutdown corner. So that one's got me a little shocked there. I don't know what they're going to do there. They've kind of been all over the board as far as what they're doing. I'm with you. I don't like the linebackers. If I'm taking any linebacker at this point, if Nakobe Dean can't beat out White or Zach Bond to start this year, I think we might have to give up on all hope on him. I really do. And I hate it because I like Nakobe Dean and I was a big guy, drafting him everywhere. But man, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. If he can't be out Zach Bond, I just don't think you can do it. Trotter's the guy I want to stash. I don't think he plays this year, but I think the idea is that I think he could take over because I just don't think Bond or White are the long-term answers. So I like Trotter. He's a stash for me. If you're in a deep league where you can put him on your bench or you have a taxi squad, I have a bunch of leagues where I have taxi squad and I'm throwing him on my taxi and just going to hold him until next year. That's kind of where I'm at there. But yeah, it's just a tough year to figure out. Nolan Smith's another guy everybody really liked. The talent's there. Guy's got major ability, another Georgia guy. But again, the fact that they brought in Bryce Huff, I think just means they think Nolan Smith's another year or two away from being able to be a full-time defensive end starter. He'll have some flashy games where he gets you 1 or 2 sacks, but then I just don't think the snap share is going to be there for him.
Can you do a favor and say Nickelback one more time?
Nickelback. Did we talk about? Did you watch that documentary? It was fire. The new documentary, you got to watch it. The new Nickelback documentary is fire. I grew up during Nickelback's prime, their absolute prime, and I still forgot how many huge hits they had.
You say another Nickelback documentary as if there was another one I should have been paying attention to years earlier.
There's one that just came out recently. It wasn't. Man, it was maybe within the last month or two, but it was good. You got to watch it. I was actually really impressed.
Fair enough. All right, let's go not to Canada, but to the Big Apple here, talking about the New York Giants. Man, losing Saquon Barkley probably was one of the better things that could have happened for the New York Giants because they got a lot of players both on offense and on defense to help get that team going. And Nate Markham on Fourth and Frames yesterday, one of his bold predictions, which I don't think is that crazy of a bold prediction, said that newly acquired edge rusher Brian Burns from the Carolina Panthers will have at least 6 sacks this coming year. I don't think that's bold at all. In fact, I think that's maybe undershooting his production playing alongside Kayvon Thibodeau. The question I have here for you, JT, is we know how elite Brian Burns is for IDP Fantasy Football. We know how elite he is for regular football. Does that or will that translate in an increase in consistent production? I say that very clearly, consistent production from Kayvon Thibodeau, or is he still more of a splash play type of player in your opinion?
I think these guys, I think is going to be the edges to watch this year because they have all the talent in the world. They have the draft capital. There are two guys that you think, hey, we put these guys on the opposite side of each other. We should just wreak havoc every week. Now, are they actually going to do it is the question. Now, they should. This should be an absolute nightmare combo for other teams to deal with. My question is, I feel like these are two of the more talented guys that just have not lived up to their potential yet in the NFL. I know Brian Burns got the huge contract. I know he's really good. I still think he should be better than what he has been. Honestly, production-wise, I think he's a really good player. I think production-wise, he should be better than what he's proven in his career so far. If those guys can come together and really turn it on, I think sky's the limit for both those guys, especially being together. But cautiously optimistic about them because they both have been two of the guys that I would say underperform more than you think they would, as far as like when you look at them, their talent, who they are, you would think they would put up better IDP numbers than they have in the past.
Now, somebody who put up really big IDP numbers last year, somebody who is need to go back and redo my rankings, but I'm not changing it. He is my number one ranked linebacker for redraft, and that's Bobby Okereke. Just a stud. Like from beginning to end, there is no drop off. There is no, fast start. This guy just went 100% in terms of just being a linebacking, tackling machine. He is there next to Micah McFadden, who, let's face it, we're all still waiting for him to be a thing. I'm looking at the Fantasy Pros scoring here for Bobby Okereke. Out of 18 games, he only had 2 games with single-digit scores. So this guy is nonstop, high-impact guy in terms of tackling. A lot of good solo tackles to assisted tackle ratios there, meaning more fantasy points for the solo tackles versus the assisted. Micah McFadden, I've seen what I've needed to see, which is not much, and I kind of can be okay with moving on past him for redraft or dynasty. I'm
with you. I don't want him either. I'm 100% with you. He's the guy. In 2 of my higher scoring IDP leagues, Okereke was number 2 overall and number 3 overall in defensive scoring. I got him 8 in my IDP Dynasty rankings. I've got him top 3 for redraft. I think you're 100% on there. I think I was upset when the Colts let him go. Honestly, a couple of years ago, I thought it was a mistake, and he has been absolutely lights out for the Giants. I think the Giants are going to be losing a ton of games this year, and I think teams are just going to run the ball against him. I think he is going to have a chance to have 1 million tackles this year.
Nice. All right, let's go to the defensive back spot here. So just to prioritize so far, Okereke, then Brian Burns, then maybe Thibodeau. Or maybe we'll be one of these defensive backs here. We get Jason Pinnock, who, whatever, Here's the thing. We got Dane Belton as the box safety, right?
Hey, I feel like I feel like he's a if I'm desperate, I got injuries, I pick him up and play him, but he's not a guy I'm like grabbing and like specifically starting every week in my run on my teams.
Now, in terms of box safety, currently, according to ourlads.com, Dane Belton is slated to be that
Tyler
guy.
Newman's winning that spot. There's no freaking way Tyler Newman is not starting there. I love Tyler Newman. I compared him to Antoine Winfield. I just think he's that type of player. He fell a little bit in the draft just because his combine numbers weren't off the charts, but we saw the same thing with Hamilton. He went to the draft, the combine. They're like, oh man, he's not that fast. He's not that. Ravens took him. He's a freaking stud. And I think Newman's going to be the same way. The guy has instincts. He doesn't have to run a 4.4 40 to get it done. I think the fact that Xavier McKinney's gone, who I like Xavier McKinney a ton. I loved him when he was with the Giants. I think Newman steps in and he becomes an instant. I have him on a ton of teams. I'm going to wait the first couple weeks just because I'm deep, but I think he's a guy that's going to end up starting for most people in IDP at safety because I just think he's going to be, again, he's going to be in the mix. I think a ton of teams are going to run against him. I think it's going to be him. I think it's going to be Kiriakou number one in the team and tackles. I think Newman ends up second on the team in total tackles.
Boom. And I don't hate that one bit. The guy is just a stud, like you mentioned. You look at the Hard Knocks series, which you haven't watched on HBO Max or Max as it's called now. Go watch it. It's a lot of fun. He was one of their top-rated defensive backs. He has ball hawk capability, but this guy is
he's all over the place. He just does a little bit of everything. You can blitz him. He just one of those guys that naturally feels the game. He knows where it's going. That's why I love him. He was my number one ranked safety in this rookie class. And even after the combine numbers, I looked at it again. I was like, am I too high on him? I went back and watched tape again. I'm like, you cannot tell on the tape that he doesn't have freak athletic numbers. He makes up for it just by the way he knows how to play football. I'm in on Newman.
All right, let's go to Big D here. Let's go to the Dallas Cowboys. Let's start with linebacker and then work our way outside in both directions here. According to ourlads.com, starting weak side linebacker Damone Clark, middle linebacker Eric Kendricks, strong side linebacker DeMarvion Overshown. And I'm going to start with him because he missed last year due to an ACL injury. He suffered that versus Seattle in the preseason, if memory serves me correctly. This guy was a converted box safety turned linebacker. I was super excited to see him play last year because one of the things that coaches praised about him is because he had that strong safety build and athleticism that he would be able to slide through the blocks, make plays in the backfield, as well as be that hard-nosed tackle machine that we all want out of our linebackers. Like I said, missed last year. It's been looking pretty good. Hearing a lot of good compliments out of training camp and OTAs and minicamps about him. I think, and this could be a very bold take here, I think he's probably the linebacker for Dynasty. I'm still holding on to in my Dynasty leagues. Two, I think he could, by the end of the season, be the LB1 for this team.
I agree with you. If I'm taking anybody, I'm taking him. I think Kendricks is like a fill-in. He's like, hey, man, I just need some tackles around. I need somebody to play linebacker. I need somebody I know is going to get snaps. Is he going to be super productive? I don't think so. But I don't not like this linebacking crew. I really don't. Overjohn's the one guy I like. I had a couple people ask me about Maris Luifa, the third-round pick out of Notre Dame. I went back and looked at him because I'm like, oh, man, he was a guy that wasn't really on my radar pre-draft. He went third round. So I was like, oh, maybe they know something I don't know. I should go back and look at him. Oh, his analytics are awful. I mean, awful. He looked terrible on tape. I'm not sure what Dallas saw in him that made him take him in the third round. But I looked at some stuff, and then I looked at some people I know who are really good film people and looked at some of their analysis, and I was like, oh, I'm out on him. I was like, I'm not in on him at all. I think he's got busts written all over him. I really do. So Overshown's the guy, especially in Dynasty, I want. Kendricks, if you're like desperate, you missed out on a bunch of linebackers redraft. If you want to take them late just to fill in until you see somebody else hit. But I agree with you. I think Overshown's the guy to own eventually. Will he be the guy at the beginning of the year? Scored you a bunch of points? Maybe not, but I think you're right. I think he's the number one by the end of the year for them.
Going outwards towards defensive backs, no J-Ron Curse. They let him go in free agency. Great news for Donovan Wilson. For years and years, it was, is it Curse? Is it Wilson? Is it Curse? Is it Wilson? They're both playing, the same comparable numbers of box snaps, a.k.a. closer to the line of scrimmage, a.k.a. playing de facto linebacker. Don't have to worry about that anymore. I think it's out of all the safeties, whether it's Marquise Bell or Malik Hooker, it's Donovan Wilson that I want in this defensive back grouping here for the Dallas Cowboys. The guy, like I said, just crowds the line of scrimmage, could provide some assistance at that linebacking spot or at that box snap location. as far as the cornerbacks are concerned, Trayvon Diggs, Deron Bland. Deron Bland, what he did last year was epic.
I mean, insanity. I mean, of course, there's no way he's going to match that. I mean, that was an all-timer season with the amount of picks and returns for touchdowns. I think what he had 9 interceptions and 5 of them returned for a TD or something insane like that. So he's got the same boat as Diggs. When Diggs was really valuable for IDP is because he was getting 1 million interceptions. So again, if you're in a start cornerback league, those guys I think are absolute boomer bust. Like they're going to get you picks and they're going to return them, or they're going to get you nothing. So those guys, man, the stats look nice the last couple of years, but they make me nervous. I've got them in a couple leagues where I have to start cornerbacks, and it's kind of like I almost go with a feeling. I kind of wait and see if they're playing a bad QB, and then I put them in. Bland obviously was the guy to just play all year last year because he was just on fire. But the question is, are they going to avoid him a little bit more because of that? Also, the question is, how good are the Cowboys going to be? Our team's going to be up on the Cowboys more than they were on the past. So those guys are solid names, good names. I think they get overdrafted. So I usually don't have them much because people grab them earlier than I think they should. But they're the ultimate boomer bust cornerbacks. They're the guys who are going to win you a week or score you 0 points or like 1 point. That is kind of who they are.
Let's go up front now to the linemen. Obviously, Micah Parsons is he's the best player on this team on defense for football and for IDP. So you don't have to overthink that one, folks. You've seen what he's done since coming out of college at Penn State. Just a dominant presence, both in playing off-ball linebacker, but also playing that edge rusher role, which he should be playing more of this year, according to camp reports. DeMarcus Lawrence, he's an interesting guy. And I don't know what to make of him because you go over to Pro Football Focus and look at the grading from last year. Had a 92.7 overall defensive grade, which is pretty elite. Or 91.3, excuse me. Had an 80.3 pass rushing grade, which again, not elite, but really, really good. But for fantasy purposes, doesn't really do it for you. You know what I mean? I'm trying to go here and really quickly pull up his points per game. DeMarcus Lawrence, where are you? He was the defensive lineman 48 with 29 solo tackles to 21. Only got you 4 sacks and averaged 6.7 points per game. Not great. But he did have a stretch of period over the course of his career, coincidentally before Micah Parsons showed up, where he was one of those elite edge rushers. Part of me wonders whether he's just taking on all the blocks to free up Micah Parsons at this point in his career. And if that's the case, he's kind of a must-avoid for me, regardless of how many defensive linemen you're starting. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, he's an older player. He's a smart player. His best days are behind him. I mean, I think he's still a solid player, but him being an elite IDB guy is gone. If I want someone opposite Michael Parsons, I'm grabbing the rookie Marshawn Nealon, 2nd-round pick. Guy's showing some really nice bend coming around the corner. I don't think he'll get a lot of playing time early, but depending on what Lawrence does this year, like I said, he was an elite guy back in the day, but he's been in the league 10 years now. He's in his early 30s, which is not usually a great spot for edge rushers. I think Nealon ends up eventually taking over that spot where I can see Lawrence actually splitting some time with Nealon throughout the year. Nealon's the guy I want in the future going forward. I think Nealon possibly wins that job or starts getting a lot more of that opposite side Parsons starting next season.
Roger. Okay, I think that does it for Dallas Cowboys. And wow, we are pacing ourselves really well back into the fray here. I think Keith Fleming next hour will be happy with us. Let's get into my favorite team because I saved the best for last because I'm biased. Let's go Washington Commanders. Dan Quinn comes over from Dallas to be the new head coach there, but his fingerprints for what he did on the Dallas defense is starting to take shape. We talked about this during the start of free agency when you and I started doing Shoot the Gap together, and we were covering coaching changes around the NFL and what that would do for defenses. And the one thing that I was kind of worried about, or kind of not worried about, but like intrigued about, was that when they signed Frankie Louvu, we knew that Frankie Louvu in Carolina the past few seasons had prowess not only as an off-ball linebacker, but as a pass rusher, as a blitzer, as an edge rushing guy who can get to the quarterback. What is it that comes across the waiver? That comes across the news this week is like, oh, they're thinking about using him in the Micah Parsons role, which is exactly what I was just talking about, playing that off-ball role, playing that run-stuffing linebacker, while at the same time being that edge rusher. And if that's the case, we go back to look at Louvu. During the IDP panel at the Fantasy Football Expo, Gary Davenport asked me, is Frankie Louvu a top 15 linebacker for fantasy football? No, to answer your question. If he's more of an edge rusher, you're taking away tackle opportunities. You're taking away and lowering the tackle floor. He finished last year in terms of points per game as the Frankie Louvu, where are you? He finished as the LB 22 overall. In terms of points per game, he finished as the LB 30. I think that is his man. If he is that edge rusher, I hate to say it, but I think that could be his ceiling. And his floor could even be lower than LB 30, really at the lower end of LB 3, again, depending on where the snaps line up here. But if he's able to, get some semblance of what he was in Carolina last year, then maybe 30 is the middle ground. But I did not like hearing that he's going to be playing that Parsons role one bit in terms of being somebody that you want to have as your LB1 or LB2. Does that scare you at all, or am I being kind of, paranoid here?
Yeah, I think there could be some crazy things going on in Washington here. So I'm going to give you like kind of and I will say this, I don't have any inside knowledge of this. This is just when I look at their roster and I look what Dan Quinn's done in the past, this is how I think I would break this roster down. I think Louvu definitely loses value as a linebacker. If he somehow becomes that outside rusher and they end up making him a linebacker / D line or DN on like MFL, like they do with Parsons, I think he will still have that upside because they'll be sending him a little bit more, but he will lose that tackle floor, which I think is an issue. I could really see this team running a lot of one linebacker with basically Wagner as the guy in the middle, making all the tackles, then moving up Louvu on the line. They traded away a ton of their stud defensive end rushers. So they've lost some of that. So I can see them moving Louvu there to kind of use him as more edge rusher with Allen and Payne and Johnny Newton kind of as the inside guys, with bringing Louvu on the outside, Bobby Wagner being the single linebacker, with Jeremy Chin kind of really squeezing up and becoming more of that strong safety / second linebacker for them. I think Chin will play closer to the line and actually might be then more of that second linebacker with Louvu blitzing more. That's where I kind of see this team. And especially if you look at the way they've drafted the last couple of years. Now, granted, Quinn wasn't there when they were making all these draft picks, but they've gone heavy in the secondary. I think they're going to run just knowing with the Eagles throwing the ball, Dak throwing the ball, all that stuff. I think they're going to want to run a lot of nickel or dime packages. I think Chin ends up being more of a linebacker type. I love Quan Martin, Illinois guy. Loved him coming out. They kind of couldn't figure out where they wanted to play him last year. He was like, oh, he's an outside corner. Then they played him in the slot. Then they kind of played him a little bit at safety. I think he ends up becoming more of a safety, the free safety behind Chin, because he does have a ton of speed, so he can make up ground. I think he ends up playing a lot more at safety. And then you got Mike Sandstrel out of Michigan, who I absolutely love. I think he is perfectly suited to be that slot corner. I love him. I'm actually picking him in a lot of rookie drafts as like my last pick because I think he could be very nice. I think they want him to kind of play that Kenny Moore spot like the Colts do. That's kind of like that last outside backer, but a guy who can come up against the run because he is physical. He'll come up and tackle. I think he plays that. And then you've got your guys from the last 2 years, Emmanuel Forbes, who they took in the first round the year before. They got him. St. Justy. How do you say his name? I always mess his name up.
St. Juice, Benjamin St. Juice.
Juice, yes. So Juice, and then they've got those two guys plus Michael Davis out there. So I think that's kind of what you're going to see a little more out of them. To be honest with you, I see a lot more of a nickel look, a nickel or dime look, with Chin coming up, helping as the actual backer, and Luvu actually sliding up with their stud interior lineman and actually blitzing on the outside, kind of like what Parsons did with Dallas. I think that's the look you're going to see a little bit more for Washington this year.
Another term for slot cornerback would be what?
Nickelback.
I'm sorry, I had to one last time before we get out of here.
And I can't help Nickelback.
You did it to yourself. He did it to all of you folks who are watching, which, by the way, thank you very much for
You're welcome. You're welcome for that.
That is our rapid preview because we really cruised through that really well. Great job, JT, of the NFC East IDP. In terms of what you got going on, JT, quickly tell the folks what you got going on in the fantasy football world.
Yeah, if you're a member of the old Dynasty League football, I just updated all my rankings. Like I said, spent about 10 hours on it last night. I was up till early this morning doing it. Did my top 150, went through. You can break it down to linebackers, defensive line, DBs, see the guys I like. If you're a fan of DBs, you want to look at my rankings because I like DBs a lot more than everyone else in the group. So you want to take a look at that. So check those things out. And then a lot of shows coming up, getting fired up. We just started the new hockey show here on Fantasy and Frames. So Tuesday nights, if you like that, check out Around the Ice here on Fantasy and Frames. Got a bunch of preview stuff for the next 2 months here leading up to the season with my buddy Toast. And we get our friend Aaron Tomatich to jump in occasionally when he can to kind of help us out on that. And then, like I said, early. My betting shows, the Stu and JT Brews, kind of been silent all summer, but now that's coming back with the season around us. So I'll have the college football show on Tuesday nights, and then also an NFL show. Not 100% sure when I'm going to film that. It might be one of those I film during the day and we post it later, but I'll have all that content coming at you hot and heavy here the rest of the season.
Yeah, folks, we have at least at minimum 12 programs for you, shows, like hour-long shows. Coming into the start of the regular season, just a lot of people here at Fantasy and Frames cranking out a lot of content. As far as yours truly, I signed up for 10 IDP articles that I'm going to try and get through by the end of the weekend to get out to you for both Dynasty and redraft purposes. We got redraft target articles coming your way, updated rankings for Dynasty as well as for redraft, IDP as well as on offense. We have our listener league, which, by the way, is in full swing draft mode. So thank you, everybody who's participating in the Shoot the Gap listener league. So just a lot of great things going on in Fantasy and Frames. And before you know it, JT, week one, baby. You know what? Week one.
It's going to be here in no time. I've got 3 of my home. I got a home league and then 2 leagues that I've been in for like 20 plus years. I got those drafts this weekend on Saturday and Sunday, so going to be pounding those ones out before my couple last redraft leagues for the year. So,
yeah,
honestly, so I got a couple late running dynasty leagues that we were looking for a couple people to fill spots. So I got a few of those drafts coming up here. But yeah, man, just kind of hammering out the end of draft season here with the redraft and getting ready for anything. And hey, hit me up at JT Orange. You got any questions on who I like, where I like them, if I would pick up this guy, where you would draft him, especially IDP, but also any kind of redraft, any kind of dynasty. I'm all over that stuff as well. Getting heavy into a lot of my Devy drafts now as people were taking our Devies in some of my dynasty leagues. So if you're looking at college players like, hey, who do you like? Who should I pick up? I'll have a lot of that info too. So feel free to hit me up and message me at JT Orange.
All right, folks, don't leave here on the Fantasy and Frames channel, wherever you're watching, because we do have the Daily Fix show with Keith.
I'm locked in. I'm watching. I can't wait to see who I'm betting on first week.
Joey Matz and the newest member to the Daily Fix, Kevin Tompkins, coming up here. So thank you very much for tuning in to Shoot the Gap. And we'll be back next week at our regular time of 10 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. Until then, y'all have a great weekend.